My name is Tinashe Ruona, and I'm a toxicologist and also a member of the Enterprise Sustainability Team at WL Gore and Associates. We are a multinational company specializing in products derived mainly from fluoropolymers. And probably I'm one of the few industry people in this particular meeting. And I'll give you a few perspectives that we have concerning, some of the fluoropolymers and also within the PFAS discussions. So I think you've all heard about this class of compounds. Literally, there are thousands of them, more than 4,700 currently cataloged. And amongst the similarities which they have is that they have a fully fluorinated carbon. But then there are also differences among them. Some are gases, liquids, and solids. And for us to view them as the same will be equivalent to say all cats are the same. So for example, PTFE or polytetrafluoroethylene, which is a PFAS substance, if you compare it with other molecules out there within the PFAS world, you can see that PTFE primarily is insoluble. It has got very low toxicity, so they're very high molecular weight, making it not bioavailable, and also very stable. And this stability of the material has led to some concerns about persistence. And today I'll argue that that persistence is by design in the case of PTFE, and it is a very important part of the applications that PTFE is used in. And typically most substances which are of high concern are typically small, bioavailable, persistent, and mobile. And we know that PTFE meets the OECD criteria for a polymer of low concern, where you have 13 things that you take a look at and evaluate a polymer against. And we know that PTFE has a number of key attributes which make it be a polymer of low concern. So in this slide, I'm just highlighting some of the differences between some of the non-polymeric versus the polymeric PFASs. And we have heard a lot during the course of this meeting and also tomorrow. A lot of data is on P4 and PFOS. And you can see that there are some health concerns from tumor and a bunch of other concerns that people have in terms of the toxicological data available for those substances. But then if you contrast that with some of the properties that PTFE has, you can see that there are indeed major differences between some of these PFASs. Hence, for us to have a blanket sort of regulation or restriction or otherwise, and consider all PFAS substances to be the same, we believe that is not a fair consideration of the state of the science and the data which is out there. And one of the big objectives which are here for these studies is for us as a company to generate some quantifiable data using an independent accredited third-party contract laboratory using international guidelines within the EU, Japan, North America, and also within the US EPA to demonstrate the stability of PTFE. And we believe that this data will provide some quantitative information as to the stability and also to expand the public knowledge of what might be able to come out of PTFE over time in the environment. And to do that, I have a couple of studies which I'm currently executing with the labs to look at different aspects, which I can broadly divide into 3 groups here. So the initial one here is the physical chemical characterization of PTFE, looking at different inherent properties of the material. And then I also do a bunch of studies to look at some of the effects of the biota to the PTFE. For example, looking at ready biodegradation in seawater, and then also in sewage, soil, and aquatic sediments, both aerobic and anaerobic transformations, which can happen to the PTFE. And then some of the other studies too will include things like hydrolysis, water solubility, landfill leachates, and also potential photodegradation of the PTFE in water and in soil. So I believe that this will be a very comprehensive set of studies to demonstrate that the material may be persistent, but then it doesn't necessarily equal to that being a hazard. So some of the data which I already have, we have looked at thermogravimetric analysis of PTFE, where we have hit the PTFE up to around 550 degrees Celsius. And 260 degrees typically is what, processing of the polymer, continuous processing of the material is done at. And you can see that up to about, 500 degrees Celsius, there is no loss of the material. And up to 550, we only have a 5% loss of the material. Therefore, it is stable up to around 500 degrees Celsius before you start to have any degradation products happening. Also, we have looked at the melting temperature for it, which is the first transition from being a solid into a liquid and potentially contributing to, the transport of the material into different, or partitioning into different environments. And you can tell that all the way up to around 400 degrees Celsius, essentially there is no, physical melting or any transformation happening to the material. Around 350 degrees, we have the endothermic effect, where we have the melt transition temperature happening for the PTFE. We have also looked at the thermal stability according to this particular test guideline, where a test material is considered to be stable at room temperature when you have no decomposition or chemical reaction observing when temperatures are under 150 degrees Celsius. And you can see here that the material is thermally stable. We have also done some vapor pressure determination, and you can tell that the material has got very little, in fact, no vapor pressure at all. And we have attempted to do some of the test guideline methods available out there. For example, the ready biodegradation in seawater. And after doing some sonication and steering, we didn't observe the required minimum concentration of 20 milligrams per liter. Therefore, we weren't able to do that particular study. And we also attempted to do the OECD 118 to look at the molecular weight of the substance, because typically substances of low molecular weight, around 500 degrees Celsius, 500 Daltons, are for concern because they can be able to go inside the cells. But then we know that PTFE is pretty big and it wasn't soluble in some of the solvents that are typically used to do this particular assay, even after aggressive sonication and steering in different solvent systems, we weren't able to get it into that particular solution. Though you can be able to use other methods like rheology to find the molecular weight of this particular substance. So far, the body of work which I have data on has to do with the water solubility, melting point, vapor pressure, molecular weight, thermal stability, and biodegradation in seawater. Studies which are ongoing right now include the ready and inherent biodegradation and also the biodegradation in sewage. We are yet to commission the anaerobic and aerobic transformations in soil and aquatic sediments. And these studies typically are also very big and take a long time, typically 28-day studies, and very expensive, running into a couple of millions of dollars. But then I hope within the fall, we'll be able to get a lot of this data, and I can be able to share that with you. And here, people will talk a little bit about the persistence of the material, and we believe that that persistence is attributable to the high strength of the bond between the carbon and the fluorine atoms, and that has enabled us to provide products which are of high societal value and which can also contribute to the environment. For example, we do fuel cell components. We also work within the aerospace for aviation and cables. We've also been working on fabrics, which first responders use in their work. We also do a lot of implantable medical devices for stent grafts and patches. And recently too, with the COVID pandemic, we've been providing some components which can be used within the drug delivery and the packaging of those particular vaccines. We also do environmental cleaning by making mercury and other filtration devices. So overall, we believe that these materials that we work with provide high societal value. And in conclusion, so far the data which I have show that PTFE is thermally stable under relevant environmental temperatures and will only start to degrade at extreme temperatures. And not all PFAS are the same. They have various differences which they have, and we believe that fluoropolymers are used to make products of high societal value. And I hope that this body of work which we are generating will be used to help distinguish the classes of PFAS to ensure that the regulations are appropriate in scope and proportionality. So thank you, and these are my contact details, and I'll take any questions.
Yes, we do have some time for questions. Lee?
What happens at product end of life? Can PTFE form microplastics?
So at the end of life of these materials, typically people use different things. We believe that sometimes they go through landfills, but then people can also be able to recycle some of them, though currently it's a little bit expensive with those technologies, but then they can also be incinerated. And once you incinerate the PTFE, it's going to give you some hydrogen fluorides, some carbon oxides, and in some cases, you will get some monomeric forms of the PTFE, that is the tetrafluoroethylene, and that gas is kind of poisonous. But then with some of the best available technologies, you can be able to remove that from the flue gases. And in terms of microplastic formation, which is the physical particulation of the material, I guess it depends on the context of use. I'm not quite sure in terms of some of the abrasion properties, but the material itself is very stable that the probability of you generating microplastics in normal usage is actually minimal, but then it is something that is of concern to the organization.
We do have time for one question.
Are any of the tests done in this study designed to pick up on small molecules that might migrate out of PTFE, such as the process aids?
Yes. So for the analytical methods that we are using, we are also, for example, looking at the EPA 537 modified method. We are also looking at some of the available literature out there for some of the things that they use to make these polymers. And for those fluoropolymers, which are made out of like a fine powder, because not all PTFE contains processing aids, but it is those which contain the, the fine powder is the one that uses processing aids. So in that particular instance, depending on the supplier too, we'll take a look at some of the processing aids that they use and see if anything actually migrates out of the PTFE, and if so, at what levels leach out, and then we can be able to do any risk assessment if anything else comes out of the PTFE. But that's a very good question, actually.